It's a pleasure to host this webinar. This is the second of the webinars we organize and we selected from the open call that we did last year, and there are 4 in all, and then this is the second one, so I'm very, very happy actually to kick off this conversation. So with me today, well, there's all of you, by the way, in the room, which are kind of getting quite a crowd here. Anyway, there's Giulia Colletti, and who actually proposed the webinar, and who will actually introduce and moderate also the Q&A as we go through it. And Christian Paul. I will let the introduction to Giulia, Noam Segal, Dr. Noam Segal, and Barbara Cueto. Just a reminder, this is a live webinar. It is recorded, so the recording of the webinar will be online soon on the IKT website, on YouTube, and as well as on our website. And I think that's it from my side. My name is Alfredo Cremerotti. I'm the president of IKT, and with me also we have Carolina Bailey-Hughes, who you all know her actually because she's the pillar of the IKT, the one who makes things happen. Anyway, thanks a lot. And Giulia, please come in, and thanks for organizing this and presenting the webinar, and thanks to the speaker for being with us today.
Thank you, Alfredo. Thank you, IKT team. Carolina was precious in implementing and arranging and coordinating everything. I would like to thank, first of all, you as director, Carolina, and second of all, of course, our speakers that I'm going to introduce briefly. Just to give you a broader sense of what we are discussing today and why, to me at least, and I hope for you connected, that this theme was somehow relevant. A few months ago, I bumped into an impressive essay wrote by Noam Segal, who is here today. And this essay is titled Notes on the Index in Accelerated Digital Times. She wrote this in 2024. And for me, this was striking because it was exploring somehow how the emergence and the hyperpresence of AI is impacting our understanding of temporality, representation, and cultural science. Of course, as a curator, as a visual somehow producer and facilitator, this impact to my eyes is pretty much characterized by a sort of reconstruction that blends different temporalities and technologies, and somehow is forcing us to move from the original object, then in our case in museums specifically are artworks, and distancing these objects from their time and space. So in this sense, these contemporary digital environments that are shaped by AI technologies are creating new forms or new relationships with time, space, and meaning. So literally they are reshaping how we understand images, but in an historical context and a contemporary one. So this AI's influence on image making in digital culture, according to the essay that Noah is going to go deeper in a few minutes, is creating what could be termed, according to her, as a post-indexical reality. And I would have liked to share these concerns and these ideas with you. So the questions that reading that essay emerged were specifically museological ones in my approach. So what role does curating play when AI cannot account for the historical context and material conditions of an artwork? And specifically, as cultural producers really entangled with provenance research history, restitution practices, how these issues that we are going to touch upon today are addressed by practitioners, artists included, because this is going to be somehow the focus of Christiane and Barbara as well. So without any further ado, let me just present and introduce the keynote speaker, Dr. Noam Segal, and I'm going to read her bio, and I'm going to do so for the following guests so that you have a clear idea where they come from and what their research is about. So Dr. Noam Segal is the LG Electronics Associate Curator at Solomon Guggenheim Museum in New York City, of course. Her work explores the intersection of the digital, political, and social contemporary art. She was the curator of 2020 Aurora Biennial in Dallas, in Texas, and she was also part of the curatorial team for the 12th Berlin Biennale. She also curated a project for Front International in 2022, the Cleveland Triennial for Contemporary Art, and recently, and that's the reason why we had the chance to initiate this conversation, she recently curated the 15th Gwangju Biennial Symposium that was titled Echoes of Tomorrow, Soundscapes in the Age of Advanced Computing. She is also currently a faculty member of the Curatorial Practice Department at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, and visiting scholars at the Tisch School for Arts in the Department of Performance Studies, and a visiting faculty member at Virginia Commonwealth University in the Department of Painting and Printmaking. The recent publications include and I quote, "The Serpentine Gallery's Futures Art Ecosystem, CryptoPunks Free to Claim" for Phaidon, and "In Place of a Missing Place at Middle East Art, Memory, Tradition, and Revival, a Special Issues of Arts." Her distinguished essay, which is the one that she's going to discuss with us today, has been published and commissioned by Pompey Commitment. So let me leave you the floor, Noam.
Thank you so much, Julia, for this lovely introduction and the kind invitation. And thank you, Alfredo and Carolina, for organizing this. And of course, thank to my brilliant panel member, Barbara and Christiane, and I look forward to your presentation as well. So I'll just start and I'll jump right into it. I started working on the index I finished working on the index about 1.5 years ago, and I'll tell how it emerged. But maybe before that, it's important to mention that the essay was written in relation to two computational apparatuses. One is classical computing, right? The computers that we use today that are based on the binary code of zeros and ones. And quantum computing, which is a much more complicated computing system that is based on qubits, a number of combinations of zeros and ones. And initially, of course, Julia invited me to speak about the two, but I realized that it might be too much for a 20-minute session. So we're only going to focus on the AI context today. Well, I feel that it's also going to resonate better with my other panel members. So hopefully you'll have something more holistic. So I'll start by sharing my screen. And then let me just go into, full mode presentation. And of course, we started from the end. So yeah, let's go back to the beginning. So I guess I have 20 minutes starting now, right? Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, great. So let's go into this. So in 1977, as many of you know, Rosalind Krauss defined the index, right? She wrote her essay, The Index in the Art of 70s Art. And Rosalind Krauss defined it as marks or traces that are footprints, stone records, smoke, that refer indirectly to a particular thing or an event, an experience or a material, right? It could be a living matter too. And she designated photography as a primarily indexical art form, right? Because the object represented a definitive existence elsewhere, right? And it's just imprinted in the image, right? It's imprinted by light or chemicals, and of course we can discuss about how it's imprinted in different electronics today. And this creates, of course, a visual reference that possesses a degree of precision, right? But is always about a reality or a thing that is more real than the image itself. The notion of the index, right, as a trace, an object, an event, or an experience, right, remains powerful today. And one of the things that are highly important about that is that Rosling point on a subjective or culturally fraught experience. And we'll go back to that point of subjectivity and how it's embodied within those imprints. Now, the focus on photography as a recording technology, right, has shifted over the past 40 years since Krauss published the article. And it allows us, of course, to jump deeper into the technologies of current image making. So, for example, another important indexical material, as we can see here, is dust. So what we're looking on now is the work Dust Breeding, where Man Ray placed Duchamp's large glass in his studio for quite some time to let the dust, of course, fall down and mark the passing of time. In that sense, the like traces that Krauss remarked, right, the works, and I'm quoting now, the works that I've been describing represent the building through the paradox of being physically present, but temporarily removed. Traces testify, end quote, traces testify on the existence as well as removal or absence of an object that is then imprinted in a static image, but still insist on its temporality. Now, dust, as we can see here, of course, is basically captures our literal and cultural DNA. It captures soot and pollen, toxins, skin particles, hair, nails, the fur of our pets, food crumbs, clothes, threads, and so on. It exists, it indexes our existence through the traces that mark time. Now, when Pompeii Commitment invited me to work on this project, of course, I don't know if some of you know, but Pompeii is the largest archaeological site in the world right now that uses AI and AI robotics to recreate the ruins of Pompeii. And that fascinated me. And it all started from a conference that actually, Julia, you were also involved in, that called Digital PTSD, that happened in Castello de Rivoli. And the work by Agnieszka Kuranta, Just Impossible, was commissioned by Castello de Rivoli. And in a conversation we were at with Caroline Christoph Bakariev, I realized that the objects that I'm discussing, the signs that we can see here, are indexing something, and asking what are they actually indexing, like, and I realized, okay, there's not much that they're actually indexing. It's some kind of a new type of indexicality that doesn't point on a specific time or cause. So maybe a few words about this work. Agnieszka here worked with the collaborators that you can see on the slide, and in particular, Geneviève von Petzenberg. And they collected 32 uniform geometric signs that recur on different Paleolithic caves, spanning from 40,000 to 10,000 years BC. And I just asked myself, okay, what are they actually indexing, right? They never actually occurred in real life, in reality. They are not remains, right? And also they are not original symbols because they lack any subjective symbolism, right? They're generated. And in short, this is how I got to look at what AI indexicality looks like today. So in this journey, I followed Rosalind Krauss's main pillars of thought. And the way Krauss thought about the index is through two main concepts, temporality, right, time, and causality. What is the cause that drives the image, right, intent and so on, that of course it's a long discussion in art history. So I'll start with AI temporality. What is time when we think of a data set, okay? Now, you remember those memes that when we were younger, let's say, right, and after maybe Facebook emerged in 2007, and a few years after, there were different memes running online, like, you know, that of the Neanderthal going to a Homo sapien and then say, go back, guys, it's a trap, right? It's just something that circulates online. And some of you maybe that have young people around see that, comes back to them on different social networks. But then at the same time, it's a meme that was created already more than 12 years ago, right? But whoever sees that today has no idea that that thing was created 12 years ago. So there is this questions of how digital objects move through the web, right? And how they lack any temporality. There is no time or context in a data set. Now, many of you maybe read Kate Crawford's and Trevor Peglin's longer studies into the baseline of the data set, ImageNet, and so on. So you probably know that the right, the benchmark where we start discussing those corporate-based AI is stemming from ImageNet, and ImageNet, as the largest online image data, was purely labeled. It was made with different mechanical Turks, and those mechanical Turks didn't always label things as we imagine as humans. So, for example, mother can also be a cup of water, and Paris can be at the same time Paris Hilton, right? And the computer, right, needs to judge based on probabilities that will discuss what is more likely the data that is connected with that image. But so what is actually being stripped away in those processes? What are we erasing in the metadata? So I just want to mention here that today we have different clip technologies that can help us excavate some of that metadata, right? But this is by reverse engineering, and it's not available on the big corporate AIs. So when I discuss this now, I don't refer to artist data sets, small data-based AI, and smaller models that are made by different individuals, but to the large corporate-based transformers, right? So Stable Diffusion, DALL-E, Midjourney, and so on. In all of those, the lens, the distance, the lighting, the moment of exposure, point of view, numerical parameters, focal point, exposure, aperture, ISO, all of those lost in the data set together with the creator of the image, the historical context, and the material conditions. Basically, the way it works that once an image is being trained, it's going through a compression process. And to compress the images is a process that could be lossy or loss-E. Most of the big transformers use lossy, and in lossy, we lose all of the information that I just mentioned, together with some other traits of the image. And those images, those metadata, basically, again, in the big transformers, cannot be detected, and it cannot be excavated. So therefore, we get a big, let's say, imagine a pile, right, of different data points, but we lack any genuine connection to where they're coming from. Now, this is what I hold in mind, of course, and I guess this is kind of like we're trying to walk this journey with you of us as art historians, right, and thinkers and curators of what do we lose? I was in a conversation with Hito Sterl, and that was already like more than a year ago, and Hito shared with me one image. That image was of images from a book of Word that was made by Brecht, and one of the images show a foot of women dipping in the shore of a sea or an ocean, and on that feet there is a black stain. Now, when you let computer vision read that image, it would say a female foot dipping in water with a black stain. But what the image was actually showing us is a woman that was, her feet was in the water somehow around 1942 to 1945 in one of the European shores. And the black stain was oil that was coming from a bombing of one of the ships that was staying, of course, between the war between the United Nations and the Third Reich. So the entire, let's say, background, right, and context, and anything that had to do with that image is gone, is lost in the data set as we know it. And again, I refer to the big corporate-based AIs. So the question is, what do we see, right? What do computers see, and what do we lose, again, as art historians? Now, this is one of the works that were made for this project, Notes on the Index in Accelerated Digital Environments. And this is a work by Marina Rosenfeld. And what you see here on the two images on the left of the image is a dub plate and a stylus. And the stylus just carries on copper particles, right? Copper dust that was basically falling and was left on that dub plate. So Rosenfeld used a microscopic camera. And on the images on the left, we can see the microscopic dust particles, right? And the way that the stylus is moving them on the plate. What we see on the right-hand side is the AI prediction of the same video, of the same images. And again, you can access the full project online. Just to say that I'm showing this here just to show how data points performance looks like, how we can see the performativity of data, and how it changes the rendering of the image when we think about it from a conceptual standpoint, but also from an aesthetic one. Okay, I see I have to rush. I'm almost like midway. So basically, and some of you may know that, what the code is doing. So let's go back to AI. So every AI is based on two main components, right? The data that is the fuel for any machine, and then the code, right? The algorithm. They both need, of course, computing power, right? But put that aside, we in those big transformers have no access to the way the algorithm is working. And we do know that today they are catering more and more to our individual traits. Of course, they see our history, our personal preferences, and so on, and they mash it together with the code. With some of the transformers, this image is more publicly available. With some of them, it is not yet. But we can see that just by using, you can try it at home with friends and see that the AI will offer different answers both to you and your colleagues, and I will speak more a little bit about why it is different. It's not only because of our individual traits, but just to say, the algorithm will calculate the probabilities, okay, of image, right, one pixel after the other. So let's say that we can see Marina's image on the left. On the right, what we're seeing is actually the trained data and how one pixel after the other, the computer analyzes the most probable answer. Now, with probability and truth, we come into a very nice conundrum, right? Because probabilities are truthful in a way, right? But they don't necessarily embody the truth. And I want to give a little example of that with something kind of funny that happened in New York recently in the past year. There has been one educational AI, and that AI was for kids who are between K to 5, so kindergarten to 5th grade. And after a short time, the programmers learned that the AI spits out that 1 + 1 = 5. And that, what we can learn from that, of course, is that majority of users believe that 1 + 1 is 5. And this is why this will be the answer that the AI will give to all of the users. So this is how it works. It doesn't mean, it doesn't make AI, right? It doesn't make 1 + 1 5, of course, but we can learn what the data and what the probability is. So it's always kind of like to remember to shift our gaze to what is most probable probable. And remember that there's a big difference between probability to what we actually see as reality. So the results in outputs extend narratives that are not necessarily situated in the object's natural history or temporality, okay? And the 1+1 is just a small example for that. So AI takes on a predictive approach, of course, to anything. This is how it was made, right? So here, moving on to causality that is embedded in those systems, I want to mention the metamatic works by Jan Tingley that, of course, discussed it in the lineage of human-machine collaboration. Of course, this is a mechanical machine. It doesn't have any data set. But here we can see the language that Tingley used is, of course, the performance of machine and how performance of machine is made one with humans. So we're shifting from one type of performance, and then at the same time, Kayanama from Gutai Group created those drawing machines that were made by self-driving cars, right? Kids' motor cars. He was trying to imitate expert expressionism, and after a few experiments with that, Kayanama decided that no machine can automate expressive human gestures, and he decided to ruin all of those machines. Now, the reason I'm mentioning it is to bring again the question of causality, right? We can go back to questions of what is the cause for an artwork. Thinking of Sol Lewitt's, of course, instructions. And here, actually, I want to give another shout out to my colleague here, Christiane, and her important show about codes. There is a big question of what is actually the artwork, right? Is it the code or is the output of the code? Is it the machine, right? Or what it eventually spits out? So we can see how those changes are affecting the way we think about machine learning today, and how it also being more and more embodied in the legal system. Maybe it's too much to go into this right now, but very recently there has been a new ruling in the United States that the output of machine learning, right, of transformer AI, if they don't carry a very, very strong humanistic finger point, cannot be shielded under human legislation, right? They cannot be protected under intellectual rights. So just to recap this part, AI operates in a deterministic framework, right? So, and that deterministic nature implies a direct cause and effect relationship where the outcome is predictable based on a given data that the algorithm was trained on, okay? So there is no actually, the only cause that an image will emerge from a machine learning is its pre-existence in the data set. So causality and intentionality in the way that we think of them in terms of curation and art histories, and of course artists and their works, has drastically been changed. And the pre-existence, again, of an image in a data set will be the causality of its inclusion in artwork. Now here, maybe also because I'm getting to the end of my time, right? I'm standing on like the last 5 minutes, I guess, or even less. Yeah, Julia, I'm hoping you can mark me time.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So maybe another important thing to mention here is stochastic, okay? So what we have in AI system is, and that might sound very technical, but it's actually pretty important for us to understand, is the stochastic causality of these machines. And some of you have maybe heard things about the emergent properties of AI. Those, I have to say, have been disputed, at least until now, right, until today, in a number of other studies. And I'll explain that in a second. But basically, what we have is stochastic causality. And I'll read this because it's better, because it's technical. It refers to a type of causality that is based on probabilistic models, right, rather than deterministic ones. AI synthesizes, algorithms, right, incorporate randomness, artificial randomness, and probability distributions to make decisions to generate output. This means that while there is an underlying structure guiding the AI behavior, the specific outcomes can vary due to the inherent randomness in the probabilistic models employed. So basically, and maybe in a more simple way, right, it's a modeling approach that creates artificial randomness, right, that can account for unpredicted things, right, and can include them while it's creating artificial randomness. So let's say we have a huge data pool that is comprised of 10 billion data points, right? One cannot necessarily predict which data point will hit another one. So this is why, right, computer scientists come up with those probability models, but we have to understand the game between this artificial randomness and actual mathematical probability. So it is deterministic, right? But at the same time, it is somewhat random. However, those cannot be used interchangeably in these models. Now I'm going to jump to the end of my presentation because I ran out of time.
3 more minutes. No.
Okay, thank you.
To be so strict, but.
Okay. So maybe I'll read something. In AI, stochastic models are deliberately designed to handle uncertainty and variability in data, allowing the system to make informed predictions or decisions, even when exact outcomes cannot be determined, right? This is, by the way, something that happens very, very, very differently in quantum computing, both in terms of temporality and causality. This is why it's fascinating to hold the two at once. So basically, what we're seeing in a model, and let's say that me and Julia will now open a model and we'll see different things. Even if I open 2 different windows and I will ask the model to draw me a house, it will probably, right, not give me the same answer because of the stochastic nature of the machine. Okay, so the machine constantly draws from a large pool of data, right, calculating the most probable answer while enmeshing both the probability that has to do with the masses, right, and also to some degree, and we don't know that because the code is proprietary, enmeshing my own individual preferences. So holding that understanding in mind, I ask myself, are we moving towards a solipsistic virtual domain? What happens to our common spaces when, 1, we don't have access to a code, 2, we lose all the temporality and the other conditions in the metadata, and 3, once we work with the AI, we see different things that are collapsing our common space. So to try and conclude here, and I will just also mention that all of the bibliography that led to this study, to this essay, is found on Pompeii Commitment website, and you can get all the bibliography and studies with their URLs and so on. So now I want to take a tiny pause and say something very positive about AI. AI is one of the largest, most important human innovations that happen, right, in the past. Well, depend how you count it, right? We can start it from the 80s, we can start it from the 60s, but of course with the really big data models, we're looking on the past 15 to 12 years. In that, I want to say that everything that is calculatable, right, from RNA to DNA sciences, from finding cure to cancer, from finding patterns in archives, right, also patterns in histories, right, AI is an amazing tool. It can show us the things that we don't always pay attention to. It brings us an incredible calculating ability that was not available to humanity before then. However, as curators, I try to think of what is not calculatable, And this is why I have this painting here that, of course, as you know, already losing things because of the nature of our digital screens, right? We all know that RGBs are limited. They're not reflecting really the color palette that we see with our own biological eyes. It also has been compressed. Lines have been vectored and so on. This is only the nature of the hardware, right? Only the digital screen. Now, when these paintings are scanned through a data set, they're becoming something very, very different than what we see here. They're losing these traces. What do we feel when we look at a painting in real life? What do we experience, I don't know, when you look at a Rothko, right? The question is, how can we calculate those experiences? Are they even calculatable? They're not the same as DNA chains. Painting and sculptures don't operate in the same way and don't give themselves because they are not calculatable in the same way. How can these machines become better and more aligned with our own cultural human histories? And how can we impact those systems? And I suggest that not only in terms of art, but also in terms of justice and automated courtrooms, and most importantly, with human phenomena. So holding all of that in mind, I guess what I want to say is just to account for the importance of artists taking place in AI engineering, playing more and more with those big AIs to try to tinker, to tilt, to change the original designations of these machines. And also, of course, from the corporate side, the importance of having an open source code and how we can benefit as a society from having more access to those machine learning systems if they would be open source codes. So I will stop here and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Noam. Thank you. Really, really glad actually for this intervention. Just to, I jump in actually for the latecomers, let's say. This is the webinar organized by IKT, hosted by the Museum, the Media Majlis Museum in Northwestern Qatar, where I work, and is on curating in the post-indexicality era, organized by Giulia Colletti with Noam Segal, actually we just heard, and Christian Paul, and which will be next, and Barbara Cueto. So if you have questions, some of you already had, feel free to type the question in the chat. We will go through it bit by bit, one by one, and then we will actually repose those questions to the speakers or to Giulia, if the question are for her or for us in general, but feel free to use this tool. And last note, the webinar is recorded and it will be online soon after we finish, actually, on both YouTube and the IKT website. I'll pass the word to you, Giulia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alfredo, for these remarks. And thank you, Noam, for trying to squeeze as much as you could in such a short amount of time. It was brilliant. And I'm confident that we have a little bit of more time during the Q&A to explore this differentiation between the AI that you covered and the quantum computing that you hadn't had the chance. I would like to introduce Christiane, and having her kind of responding to some extent to certain suggestions and certain hints that you gave, Noam, specifically what is about those things, those sensations, those practices that you mentioned, Noam, cannot be calculated, and in particularly what could be at this point the role of curators and artists as context providers, which is something that Christiane has explored deeply in the past and currently in her upcoming publication. So without any further ado, Christiane, I'm going to leave you the floor, but allow me, prior to do this, to just read and introduce you properly. Christiane Paul is curator of digital art at the Whitney Museum of American Art and professor emerita in the School of Media Studies at the New School. She's the recipient of the 2023 Media Art Histories International Award and the Thoma Foundation's 2016 Arts Writing Award in Digital Art. And her books are a few of them. Digital Art, published for Times and Hudson in 2003 and the 4th edition last year. A Companion to Digital Art, Blackwell Willing in May 2016. Context Providers, Conditions of Meaning in the Media Arts, published by Intellect in 2011, and then the Chinese edition here later, 2012. And New Media in the White Cube and Beyond, UC Press 2008. At the Whitney Museums, she curated exhibitions including Harold Cohen Heron 2024, which is pretty much recent, Refigured 2023, Programmed Rules, Codes and Choreographies in Art 1965-1918, Corey Archangel, Pro Tools 2011 and Profiling 2007. And she's responsible for Artport, the museum's portal to internet art. Other curatorial work includes Chain Reactions in 2023 that you can check online, Demoda 4.0, Dislocation, and The Question of Intelligence at the Kellen Gallery, The New School, 2020. Little Sisters is Watching You Too at the Pratt Manhattan Gallery in 2015, and What Lies Beneath in Borusan Contemporary Istanbul back in 2015. Without any further ado, Christian, please, you can start whenever you feel ready.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Julia, and huge thanks to the IKT team for inviting me and organizing this, and of course to Noam and Barbara and all of you for attending. So I'm going to pick up on some of the issues that Noam mentioned in terms of the functionality of AI and explore a little bit what it means for authorship and agency in art. Once again, since I only have 20 minutes, this is going to be a super cursory overview, and hopefully we'll have some more time to discuss this later. So I want to mention from the start and reiterate what Noam just said, that AI has a long, long history of being very different approaches, have been used, all of them have an impact on ideas of authorship and agency. We have seen two AI winters in the 70s and late 80s, early 90s, respectively. Of course, we're under an AI heat dome right now, and looking at these technologies from a different perspective. Once again, picking up on what Noam just said, I always use this diagram to make some major distinctions between approaches to AI. The first AI systems of the early 70s were symbolic AI, so-called expert systems. These are based on heuristics and rules and function very, very differently from the statistical probabilistic AI that Noam just described, and that is basically at the core of the text-to-image models or GAMs, or what we're seeing today. I will talk a little bit less about sub-symbolic AI and effective computing. I also want to mention that the boundaries here are not super strict. The current probabilistic statistical models are also increasingly incorporating knowledge modules again, which I think is very important and the way to go. So the current discussions surrounding authorship in AI tend to be very polarized, with one pole and camp basically saying, oh, artists are being replaced, the other camp saying, oh, text-to-image models are just Insta-kitsch engines. And I always use this image to basically consolidate that this image by Jason Allen, created by Midjourney, won the Colorado State Fair. So that some people might argue, ooh, here is a replacement of an artist. Well, I think the camp saying this is just insta-kitsch would also use this image as an example of basically highlighting the typical aesthetic and style of the blurry depth of field and the probabilistic optimization and averaging of images here. So I want to unpack this a little bit more and arrive somewhere in between that polarized discussion. And I want to start with the definition of AI art. So many people today understand it as just putting in a text prompt into a text-to-image model, and that I would not call AI art. So I think about AI art as a subcategory of digital art that incorporates AI as a tool and medium and engages with it both practically and conceptually. So AI art structurally enacts critical and aesthetic elements that are based on that practical engagement. And I think it's very important to distinguish this from the use of AI technologies as a mere tool in the creation process. I would predict that many arts, from painting to sculpture to photography, will use AI as a tool somewhere in the creation process without necessarily conceptually engaging with it. And I wouldn't necessarily call that AI art. I also want to unpack agency a little bit before I dive into examples of artwork. So in a very general sense, you could say that agency denotes actions or interventions that produce a particular effect. And when it comes to digital art in particular, I think we have to distinguish artistic agency, the ability of artists to make intentional choices and take actions that shape their practice and engage with the audience, from the audience agency that happens when works are interactive and enable a user's participation to varying degrees. So I want you to keep that in the back of your mind as we're talking about agency and authorship. And what I want to run through fairly quickly is examples of different approaches and different weightings of authorship and agency on that spectrum of AI. Starting with actually programming the whole system and reasoning models, the creation of custom data sets, which is what many artists are doing, working with generative adversarial networks or artificial neural networks. Noam already mentioned that was what she didn't focus on particularly, so the smaller data sets, the curation by an artist of the outputs of what these models generate. Also, the creation of LoRa's low-rank adaptation models to fine-tune stable diffusion models, which is where a huge area of practice in AI art lies, and the creation of tools or so-called autonomous artists and self-directed AI entities. So I want to start with Harold Cohen, who was the artist who created the first AI software for art making, starting in the late 60s when he came from the UK to San Diego. And he officially named his software Aaron when he was at the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Lab. So these are some images from my exhibition at the Whitney Museum last year. So over the decades, Cohen developed Aaron from the 70s until his death in 2016. Aaron went through an evolution and created different types of imagery, a frontal presentation of very simple evocative shapes that would then gain more of a sense of perspective. Then came figurative drawings in a more sophisticated visual space, and they would gain a fully three-dimensional knowledge base. And then in the early 2000s, he started removing the figures and moving into a jungle phase. And along with it all, Cohen would build his own drawing and painting machines that would execute this. The Whitney Museum has 4 of Cohen's softwares in its collection, among them Aaron KCAT, which is figurative, KCAT meaning Kurzweil Cyber Art Technologies, because Ray Kurzweil commissioned this work, and the Harold Cohen software from the plant focused phase. So here you see the software live being projected next to paintings that relate to it. And I want to make very clear here that the Aaron software does not work with canned elements. So everything that you see here in this recording is basically created from scratch. Aaron knows how to grow branches and leaves. Aaron understands color composition. So really an expert system that Cohen wrote from scratch. So in the figurative phase, we also juxtaposed the software with paintings. So in the beginning, Aaron would do compositions and Cohen would still color himself. And then he also teaches the software coloring and builds a painting machine. So the output is fairly limited in terms of figures and plants in these compositions, but it's really amazing how Cohen managed to basically encapsulate this. We also had in the galleries 2 drawing machines that we rebuilt and reconstructed that were creating life. And you see here images of the drawing machines, plotters, doing very early work, the mazes, those are the colored lines you see, and then outputting figurative drawings. And one thing I want to make clear here, also referencing what Noah said, is this idea of authorship. So we generated around 5,000 drawings over the run of the exhibition. The Harold Cohen Trust made very clear, and I absolutely agree with them, that these are not Harold Cohen's. For an original Harold Cohen, it takes a collaboration between the artist, the software, and it takes the process itself. That ended with Cohen's death. So the trust does not consider these works Harold Cohen's, but output of the Aaron software at a specific time. And I want to once again highlight what it takes to build a system like that. So what Cohen did in order to generate these figurative drawings is really creating maps of distances between points on the whole body. So you're just seeing an arm here, but he did that for the full body to preserve proportions. And here you see a page from the notebook where you can see all the different phases that the software iterates through. So what Cohen basically did here was create a drawing and painting system, and he had full authorship and control over it. Coming back to Noam, by current legal standards, that still means that what the drawing machines generated in the exhibition technically is not copyrightable because the human hand wasn't involved. So I could make an argument for the involvement of the human hand in court, but that hasn't happened yet. I will make some major jumps to different technologies, but do not want to ignore the whole history of AI art, and quickly reference my exhibition, The Question of Intelligence, AI and the Future of Humanity, at the Callan Gallery at the New School, which basically gave an overview of how the sensorium is being encoded in AI and looked at different historical moments. And I just want to highlight David Rokeby's landmark, The Giver of Names, another example of an artist having full authorship here. So in this installation, you pick up one of the objects from the floor or something you have in your pocket, you put it on a pedestal, and the computer system goes through vision analysis and then via a database of words associates words with it and arrives at poetic statements. So here, very interesting in the context of text-to-image models in particular, you can see the growing sense of abstraction. So many things that in today's softwares would happen in the black box and are literally spelled out on screen for you in this particular work. In the 90s, we also saw a lot of experimentation with chatbots. Lynn Hirschman-Leeson's Agent Ruby was one example. And this was at the same time when Richard Wallace created the Alice bot that would really dominate dominate AI chatbots for quite some time. So here also an artist having a lot of control over this, and this experimentation with chatbots continues. Just a more contemporary example, Stephanie Dinkins, not the only one, too, where she decidedly works once again with a small underrepresented data set, just one African American family. So very different from what is happening with ChatGPT. There's a lot more to say about it, but I don't have the time for that. And I want to quickly move through different stages and shifts in authorship and agency. Since 2018, we basically saw an explosion of GAN-based work, generative adversarial networks, the sale of the portrait of Edmund Bellamy by the French collective Obvious really created a lot of buzz. GANs were created by Ian Goodfellow in 2014, but this really got a whole movement often referred to as GANism rolling. And from the start, I want to draw attention to these specific aesthetics here. All GAN-based work looks very, very similar in this blurry averaging and optimization of images. And I think what we see here is more of a shift to conceptual engagement on artists' end. So again, works, as many of you may know, with an initial training set. So you train it on specific images. This may be a big data type of data set, or it may be artist-generated data sets. Then you task a generator with a specific task and have it evaluated in the process by a discriminator that basically evaluates how much those images meet their goal. And when we're looking at GAN-based imagery by artists, once again, I would say very much a shift towards concept here. We look at two major outputs. So many artists actually show this as serial images. Serialization is very important to this practice, often as printed out images, or as video-based work that really shows you transitions. And here we're looking at Mary Flanagan's Grace AI, in which she trained again on paintings by women only, then tasked it with creating portraits of Frankenstein, really riff off Mary Shelley's critique of male creation. So here, once again, the very distinctive aesthetics of again and conceptual approach. And I would say the same goes for Anna Riddler's Mosaic virus that references the historical tulip mania in the Netherlands, where these rare tulips were really traded at high prices. And she emulates this through, again, this is also connected to tokenization and plays with value. A lot more to say about this work, but once again, I don't have that much time. And I want to jump into pre-trained transformation and the evolution of GPT from 2018, when GPT-1 had 117 million parameters, to 2023, where we're looking at 1.76 trillion with all of the problematic aspects that Noam previously outlined here. And artists working with GPT do it also in very different ways. Many of them use the earlier models because the later ones would be so neutered in terms of the streamlining of the efficiency of the software that they lose the rawness or poetic aspects of it. Just mentioning one example, the next biennial should be curated by a machine, a work by Übermorgen in collaboration with Leo Impad and Jascha Kruser, which we commissioned for the Whitney Museum's Artport site together with the Liverpool Biennial. And we trained GPT on all of the records of the Whitney Biennials and Liverpool Biennials. And then what the software does is basically curate biennials in 64 universes with different weightings, generating press releases, curatorial statements, artist bios, and this was never meant to be a work that curates fantastic biennials, but rather one that really looks at the standardization of curatorial language and what a system does with that. So finally, moving to text-to-image models. So here it gets way more complicated in terms of agency. We have another layer of loss of agency and authorship in the black box due to what Noam already previously outlined, the fact that these vast data sets of images have been labeled through very problematic processes with text in the first place, and that allows to generate images on the basis of your text prompts. So once again, artists engage with this in a much more conceptual way. I would say that text-to-image models constitute a new form of transmediality, a transtextuality and transvisuality that works across and beyond media and media-specific behaviors. And the example I want to mention here is Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst's X Harry Mutant X that was curated and commissioned by my colleagues Chrissy Isles and Meg Onley for the last Whitney Biennial in 2024. And what Holly and Matt are doing here is really drawing attention to the fact that all of these large-scale text-to-image models are trained on images scraped off the net, on artists' imagery without giving artists compensation in any way for their authorship that these systems rely on. And Holly and Matt in this process and for this work basically trained Alora and created a model of Holly based on her signature hair color and hairstyle. And you can interact with this work at the Whitney Museum's Artport, and no matter what you put in most cases, the images will incorporate Holly's signature style. This is a more playful engagement, of course, but Holly and Matt also have been substantial in really advocating, also legally in Europe, for different types of models. Through source.plus, for example. So here there are basically image text data sets for foundation model training that really work with images for which permission has been granted, behind that being the spawning collective and their do not train tool suite. So really advocating for stronger ethics in that process. And here you see the stakeholders. I think, Julia, I may be out of time, so I will jump very quickly to the very end of this, and basically skipping a few things, but just throwing out there some more recent experiments with so-called decentralized autonomous artists, such as Botto and Kiki, which also gathered a lot of attention. So I think it is actually misguided to describe these systems as autonomous artists, because they heavily draw on text-to-image models and black box generated images. What they are is, I think, experiments with different community-based governance structures. So there's a whole group of people that trains and generates these images through Botto. While the images are credited to Botto, it's actually a collective of artists and people behind that. The same goes for Kiki, developed by Dirk Sando from MIT, and a whole team. Once again, I think a little misguided to call this a self-directed computational entity, but what is behind it is really a different governance structure. So all of these just as examples of different engagements with authorship and agency.
Christian,
thank you so much.
Thank you Thank you for this overview on such a specific case studies, a few which we're going to dig up more on the Q&A because we received certain questions related to Harun specifically. It seems so unnatural passing and moving forward so fast, not even be ready to digest everything. But I would like to I would like to pass the mic to Barbara, specifically to share, as pretty much Christian brilliantly read, your insights on both post-indexicality, but also the ethical dimensions of these technological shifts that Christian brilliantly put forward. In particularly, you digged up on authenticity as a notion, especially when you were observing artistic strategies in what we call this digital or post-digital era. So I would like you to expand on this, but prior to doing that, I'm going to introduce you properly. Barbara Cueto, she's an independent curator based in Berlin. Her projects are at the intersection of contemporary art, new technologies, and activism. She's currently working as an online curator for LAS, the Art Foundation in Berlin. She has convened and curated projects at institutions such as Photo Wien in Austria, C/O Berlin, Interaccess in Toronto, Van Abben Museum in Eindhoven, Fundación Le Caixa in Barcelona, MoMA in Moscow for the 6th Moscow Biennale for Young Art in Russia, Asia Cultural Center in Gwangju, which is in South Korea, La Casa Encendida in Madrid, Beton Salon in Paris, Maraz in Maastricht, Impact Festival in Utrecht, and the Apple Art Center in Amsterdam, and of course, all in the Netherlands. She has held curatorial and research fellowships at Singapore Art Museum, Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art and Seoul, and has also been a resident at Tokyo Wonder Site in Japan, Rupert in Lithuania, and Cité des Arts in Paris. She holds a PhD in cultural analysis from the University of Amsterdam that was titled White Papers on Dissent, Politics and Poetics of Blockchain, which investigated the centralized ledger technology as a tool for radical imagination. She is also an alumna of the Apple Center, the Apple Curatorial Program in Amsterdam, the Center, of course, of Curating Studies. She holds an MA in Arts Management from the University of Maastricht and a BA in Journalism from the Complutense University in Madrid. In addition, she has been awarded Commisart, a curatorial award by La Caixa MACBA in Barcelona back in 2022, Ineditos in 2017, which was a prize for emerging curators in Spain, and numerous grants and scholarships such as the Butin Foundation grant for young curators in 2014-15. So, Barbara.
Hello. Let me share my screen. Yes, here. Okay. So, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Julia, for the invitation. I'm super thrilled of sharing this moment and this webinar with Christian Paul and Noam Segal. And of course, thank you everyone for tuning in and spending some time and listening to these ideas. I'm trying my best to kind of go back and build upon all the previous conversations. So I don't know how good this is going to happen, but I've been trying to take notes on this. So I'm going to again mention and think through this new type of authenticity, one that takes into account the agency of the non-human, and I'm going to try to think aloud about strategies and new ways of curating this kind of AI-driven world. To do so, I'm going to do a brief kind of a tour on like some of the main takeaways of the book that I co-edited years ago with Bas Hendricks about the change in the nature of authenticity, then move into how AI has come to exacerbate many of the things that we were pinpointing already in 2016. And to exemplify this, I'm going to be talking about a project that I curated last year with cross-lucid, and then I would try to move again to the idea of post-indexicality and how it affects authenticity, to finally introducing the idea of curating as a form of repertoiring to reshape and redefine authenticity in the context of digital media. So let's start. Okay, sorry. Okay, so the term of the authentic, what we consider authenticity, traditionally carries two meanings: either something that is of an undisputed origin or authorship, or is faithful to the original. To call something authentic means to claim or that it is or it professes to be something that it has to be original. So in terms of creation and in essence. So historically, authenticity has been about staying true to the origin, to an original state, or to oneself. So Kierkegaard related to religious faith, Nietzsche to virtue, the Romantics to self-discovery, and later on the existentialists in the 60s pushed it a bit further, seeing authenticity as a struggle against societal pressures, and which means that it was a rejection to the conformity in favor of something much more deeper and individual truth. So what happens really when there's a shift from these pre-digital societies to the post-digital ones? Traditionally, these two key criteria define authenticity: provenance and content. Authentic objects or even personas were original, they were real, and they were pure, but when they were what they claimed to be, and their origins could be traced and verified. Essence and appearance was always one. And yet, in the book that we wrote years ago, and now it's almost a decade since that, we explore that authenticity in a digital context becomes much more of a slippery notion. Authenticity has more from a state of being to a performance. It is not just something that you are, it is something that you do. And crucially, you're always doing to an audience, you demand an audience. And social media amplify this shift. We no longer merely exist authentically, but we perform authenticity to others. What was once a fixed quality has become somehow of an ongoing project, a continuous project of becoming. Provenance, which was once the pillar of authenticity, has now been overshadowed by circulation. The more that an image circulates, the more valuable it becomes, while the origins somehow fade into irrelevance. We saw that this in the never-ending consumption of images. Back in the time of the book, we mentioned Tumblr. Now we will do it with Instagram. And there's a quote that I really like in the book of David Jocelyn that he said that instead of an aura, there's a buzz. So as I said, the book was written in 2016, and the examples now feel quite dated. But the core ideas still resonate, I think. AI has dramatically accelerated image production, bringing authenticity again into question. So AI-generated images, deepfakes, and chatbots have further destabilized what we thought we once understood. Is an artwork less valuable now because it was created by an algorithm? Is a poem that it was written by an AI less authentic? All these questions keep on raising. We've been hearing an hour now before this, but this is a question that keeps on happening a lot. So the questions really are new, but in the age when the line between human and non-human is increasingly blurred, these questions become more urgent than ever. So to illustrate this, I'm gonna talk about, I'm gonna explain a project that I recently curated for LIS, which is a foundation in Berlin that explores the intersection of art, science, and technology. And this project was called To Fracture Time is to Create an Otherwise. For this, what I did was create some sort of an arranged marriage between science fiction writers and digital artists to create new artworks. These outcomes, the outcomes of these collaborations were a series of web-based commissions, and each of them take very different shapes. But what I'm going to talk in this one is the one of Cross-Lucid on Ryan Fassey, Read the Ocean Around You. So Cross-Lucid is an artist collective that engages with cross-disciplinary projects with technology that explore the self as a network, digital intimacy, and reimagine technology alliances. Using filmmaking, poetic AI, and collage technique, they create experiences to prototype future scenarios and promote meta-modern values. And Ryan Fassey is a British science fiction writer and a designer that is living now in Japan, in Ishikawa, and his debut novel, The Virosexuals, earned a cult following in the queer literary scene. So to create this each of the web-based commissions, we had like very long conversations, like lots of workshops. And one thing that I keep on coming in this particular project is the idea, we were really interested in the idea of language, and more concretely, what escapes from it. They were interested in the liminal space that can be grasped or can be expressed through languages, both in religion or a religious experience, but also in like the liminal space that created by LLMs and places that we cannot access through that language. The ineffability becomes the core of our research, something that we cannot express, the one we cannot explain, or we can't know. And this brought us again to the affect of the non-human. So this has a really weird voice, but I'm not gonna, because it becomes super cacophonous, but I encourage everyone to have a look afterwards. Orion wrote the story that it was loosely based on a dream he had, where a character, probably himself, encountered two omens, these ones that we are seeing now. And he had to decide whether to keep them or not. The character and the story was called You, and he was guided by a druid called Claude, which helped him navigating the complexities of an environment that was ever-changing. Read the Ocean Around You proposed a non-linear narrative through an interactive and generative online environment. This meant that the story was understood as a choose-your-own adventure, having multiple and different endings. And the collective cross-lucid tried to explore this idea of non-linearity through a 3D environment in which the visitor could move through the different passages in an AI live generation, which is the swamp that we're seeing here now. To do so, they built this 3D environment with as I said, an AI live generation, which means that the environment was constantly changing, or still constantly changing, with interactions of the visitors, like depending on the amount of people that is visiting at the same time, based as well in the data set, and or of course the answers, because there's like a series of questions that are going to be arising there. So like the main character in the story, the visitors were also guided in this, they call it the healing spring. There is this swamp-looking environment that served as a scenario for the short story of where the protagonist was You. The voice that we're not hearing here now because it sounds a bit weird, so it's too loud, they would say. The voice that guided You was the druid Claude, who was in itself an LLM. And the work started with a video that we've seen a snippet before, and depending on like how you move through this environment, you will create different endings, and all of the endings have different videos, all created by generative AI. So how do we do how was the project done, right? So as Christiane explained, it was Laura's fine-tuning stable diffusion model. So let's say that the artist crafted the models from scratch. And the data set was their imagery, like the story from Orion worked as the prompt. So in a way, what we like to say was like the words of Orion spawned the worlds of cross-lucid. So they use Orion's story as well as the data set to create the Claudes, so the druid questions, and to create the voice that is also, they also use a voice model that combine the voices of the three of them. Also, the question is now then, how or to what should we apply this slippery notion of authenticity? And when we ask this question, of course, we can't avoid questioning also what are the limits and the agency of the non-human with this. This, of course, opens up a completely new situation, differently from what we have in the book before. Is authentic the generative environment, the ones that we just seen before, this like swamp-like, is the videos that are afterwards, is the interactions with Claude. Traditionally, we always be talking about the end products. And in this case, we see that there's many more things that we could like. This is, for example, some of the million of images that we got. And this in the other side is the model, like how the model will work for the environment. So as I mentioned before, authenticity is something performative and needs of an audience. And in this case, the piece in itself proposes a performance or a performative state in which the audience and their data is needed to function. If we think of provenance, the original contribution is the text of Orion and the images from Cross-Lucid. So then we would say the data set. Or we could see it differently. Would then the authenticity of the work be restricted or allocated to the models that made possible and articulate the environment? And then the reply to this would be that then the worlds that AI spawn, they are less original or less authentic. So we see that the relevant question is not so much what is authentic, but how can we include the role of the non-human within this new type of authenticity. And for this, it became really useful to have the concept of post-indexicality. So when I was preparing the talk, I had the pleasure of reading Noam's text. And there was two ideas that really resonated with my understanding and what I wanted to talk about authenticity, which is both, as she mentioned, temporality and causality. And both helped me very much to kind of thinking through this evolving role of the non-human shaping authenticity. Noam explains this AI indexicality, post-indexicality operates in multiple temporalities at once, and often they're in non-linear ways. So in traditional authenticity, by contrast, is always tied to a fixed moment. If we think of a sculpture or a painting, we know that we know the artist, the materials, the technique, and crucially, we also know when it was produced. But in an AI-generated work, it doesn't function in this way. It's not a singular and traceable temporality. They are created in loops, in layers, and simultaneities. And when we define authenticity today, we need to account for this post-indexical temporality. Then there's causality. And in the traditional artwork, as I said, causality is kind of clear. An artist working with a specific historical condition applies their skill to produce an artwork. But in AI, however, it's drawing from gigantic, vast data sets where the causal chains are synthetic, are fractured, and are largely unreadable. So there's no relation to the author, no physical and spatial constraints, no clear historical groundings. The results emerge from black box processes, making authenticity, or at least the authenticity that we knew before, very difficult to pinpoint. This growing gap between traditional authenticity and the AI-generated work forces us to rethink what we mean with authentic. So post-indexicality challenges us to expand our understanding to include non-human temporality and an opaque and algorithmic causality, one that eludes our usual frameworks for authorship, for intent, and historical context. So, and this is when curating AI-generated works gets really tricky, because traditional curatorial practices is rooted in provenance, in a historical lineage of the object. But what causality is synthetic, authorship is blurred, and how do we even start to curate in the traditional sense? This is when I want to propose the idea of curating as an act of repertoiring rather than archiving to better accommodate this idea of the new authenticity. And please bear with me, because this is just work in progress. I've been recently a mother and I never have time to write anything properly. So this is just lots of ideas that I have while preparing this. So I take this notion of the repertoire from the scholar Diana Taylor, who understands it as a way of transmitting knowledge instead of through static archives, but through embodied and repeatable performances. Repertoire can embrace post-indexicality, acknowledging non-human agency, not as a glitch in the system, but as a legitimate part on the artistic production. So her ideas on the repertoire appear in this book, The Archive and the Repertoire, Performing Cultural Memory in the Americas, which has been super influential in my thinking, especially when I was writing my PhD. Diana Taylor is a scholar specializing in performance and performance archiving, and focusing especially in Latin American practices. Taylor explores two types of knowledge. One that is, they are always kind of in a hierarchy, one that is above, that is the written, stable, and transmittable knowledge, versus one that is more performative, embodied knowledge that passes through repetition. And this shapes at the same time two modes of preservation. That one that is with an archive, which is safeguards supposedly enduring materials such as documents or a building or a bone or an artifact, versus the other one, which be the repertoire, which carries ephemeral practices. And this could be verbal performances such as songs or myths or prayers or oral histories, or non-verbal acts like dances, sports, rituals. The key difference lies in transmission, storage, and dissemination. Where the archive seeks permanence, the repertoire thrives on live embodied enactment. Taylor urges us to see performance as a system of learning, of storing and transmitting knowledge. And she highlights the embodied performances have long been preserving memories and shape identities in literate and semi-literate and also in digital societies, because not everyone has arrived to modernity or to culture through the written form. And this insight is specifically very relevant when we talk about the digital, because the way that we learn with the digital, it is also a form of embodied engagement. The same way we're learning the same way to play the piano than to play a video game, let's say. So this brings us to let's say that performance or performative knowledge becomes a crucial lens to understand cultural expression, because acts of civic disobedience, resistance, citizenship, gender, or like sexual identity, they are always rehearsed and performed in daily life and daily and public life. Performance aesthetics vary across communities, as we know, reflect also in cultural and historical specificities. Therefore, the repertoire not only encompasses a cultural expression, it also shapes modes of learning and belonging. And we see here TikTok, which is, let's say, an expansive repertoire of viral choreographies, which are continuously performed, reinterpreted, and transmitted. So what TikTok does is that it provides a system of transmission of this ephemeral practice, the dance. It generates a specific digital culture within it and enables a process of belonging in digital communities. So reflecting on my experience creating pieces like the ones of Course Lucid, I've come to see exhibitions as a very reductive kind of framework or experience. And thinking of as curation as a creation of a repertoire rather than the archive offers to me much more possibilities to really expand this concept of not only the exhibition making, but also exhibition making that has a new type of authenticity, one that is more related to digital art. So the repertoire requires presence, and knowledge is always produced and reproduced through participation, through the being there. And unlike these other objects that are living in the archive, a repertoire-based work would evolve with each of the interaction. So like we see here that the dances shift ever so slightly, the same way as you go to the project of Course Lucid, and you would always have a different experience. So projects like the one of Course Lucid, as I said, are ephemeral precisely because they are in flux, changing with the user, like the user data trails and the collective interactions. So this instability doesn't diminish their authenticity. Rather, it complicates preservation, as there's no singular version that can be properly archived as we traditionally understand archiving. Instead, the repertoire enables a continuous form of enactment and transmission of this embodied memory. As we know, a live performance can never be fully captured by the archive, and we know that this, like, we could have a video performance, like a performance that has been recorded, that is not the performance in itself, is just part of the archive, and the performance would become a part of the repertoire. In the same way, digital artworks function as these living entities that resist static documentation. They do not disappear really, but what they are is instead they are reactivated and with each of the encounters, existing in post-indexical time, a time of multiple and non-linear temporalities, where the traditional authenticity is always tied to a fixed historical moment and an archive object. A repertoire embraces a fluid temporality, one that is much more attuned to this non-human agency. This shift also reframes authorship, and of course, Christiane has already talked about before. So in a repertoire, as we know, as we are trying to explain here, originality dissolves, and what matters is really like the repetition. Authorship then refers not only to the creator, but also includes the performer. And we don't have always a lone maker, but also we need to include the audience, because without them, the project can never exist. It can never be continued. So authenticity is not an inherited quality, but a performance in itself. It needs to be enacted, perceived, and crucially, it needs to be co-produced. As I've argued before, authenticity is in the eye of the beholder. And today, this beholder must also include non-human agents, such as participants, audiences, and also as co-authors of the experience. So where does this leave us? If we think of authenticity in the age of AI, I propose to move beyond these ideas of the traditional preservation, where the meaning is always allocated to an archive, and instead embrace the idea of the repertoire. And as I said, Diana Taylor describes the repertoire as a way of transmitting knowledge through live and repeatable performances rather than to static objects. Unlike an archive, which stores books or artifacts or documents, a repertoire is embodied. It exists through action, participation, and interaction. Think of a dance, a ritual, or the TikTok choreography that we just seen. These things don't sit in a museum and an archive in the same way. They stay alive by being performed and reinterpreted every time. This shift from archive to repertoiring is key to understand AI-driven art. Generative works like those of Cross-Lucid receive traditional conservation. They change with every interaction, shaped by human input, the data flows, and also machine learning. So they aren't stored as much as they are activated, meaning that every time someone experiences them, they are both witnessing them and also recreating the work. This challenges all notions of authenticity, as I explained it before, because authenticity is always tied to provenance, to find a traceable origin, a stable creator, and a single moment in time. But digital works exist in post-indexical time, where authorship is diffuse, causality is non-linear, and human and non-human agents collaborate. So if authenticity is no longer something that we own, but something that we perform, what does this mean for curating AI-driven works? It means thinking less as archivists and more like facilitators of live, ongoing experiences. It means embracing the fluidity, participation, and unpredictability that the digital art thrives on. And as I said already before, I don't have any answers. I have lots of questions and blurry ideas. And I haven't really made any concrete decisions at the end. But I'm sure that in this AI-driven world, authenticity is also going to come back again, and is also always evolving in the same way that we are evolving, and at the same time as the technology is with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I jump into here actually, and then I will give the word to Julia. Just to remind where we are. So this is the IKT webinar, and it's on focus on the idea of curating in the post-indexicality area. We heard from 3 fantastic speakers, Noam Segal, Christian Paul, and Barbara Cueto, who just finished her presentation. I really like the fact that you ask each other pertinent questions. I think it's not a given in a webinar. Usually you just state things, but actually the fact that you actually pick up each other actual presentation and ask questions, I think is a fantastic thing. Anyway, just to remind you where you are, this is the IKT webinar, and hosted by the Museum, the Media Imagery Museum at Northwestern Qatar. And Julia Colletti, who actually has proposed this webinar and is moderating the session, will now actually pick up some of the questions that you have submitted through the chat. The chat is still open actually. If you want to jump onto a question, please feel free. And that's it. I think we take it from there. Julia, back to you.
So thank you, Alfredo. Just allow me to thank our guests once again, and I appreciated Barbara's conclusions that in a sort of recomposition, as Alfredo was mentioning, pinpointed and actually opened up to what Noam hasn't been able, due to the time pace, to dig up more. So prior to going to the Q&A, allow me to ask you something, or at least pointing with just one small consideration. I truly appreciated Barbara's let's say, suggestion, hint, when she mentions curating as an act of repertoiring, because, and this is something that I would like to ask to Noam particularly. Noam, following this suggestion, do you think that the quantum computation that we didn't cover, but maybe we can open up slightly, and by quantum computation, I mean that computation where all the entities do not possess a pre-existing property, but they emerge by interaction, might respond to what Barbara was mentioning in exhibition making as a new type of authenticity. So namely, the works that are evolving while reiterating, so through interaction between each other, if it makes sense what I'm attempting to ask you. And then I would open up and picking some of the questions from our participants.
Thank you for this. Yeah, and thank you, Barbara. It was super interesting. As far as I remember, and I might be mixing things, but the repertoire emerged as an idea, right, that Diana Taylor made for performance. And I highly agree that in many lineages and conceptual, let's say, pillars, performance is much more connected to the current digital age, right, to the AI-driven large data set models to, from other, let's say, from conceptual art or from other things that are associated with different histories. In relation to, and then let's say also in performance, of course, we have the idea of the residue. We have the idea of the index. Also, it appears as part of Krauss's original article, how basically different aspects of the performance and the performative can be preserved, right? And we can see that beautifully, for example, in the work of Adam Andieta or other performers. So moving on to quantum computing, this is a very, very different type, I would say. Well, the entire question of memory is something completely different when we look into quantum realities, because there is only the present moment. In a way, right? There is this thing that is very haunting and very, very different when we look on the subatomic level, that a thing can be here and here, right? And then it moves somewhere else, but it's just, it's here and then it's there. There is no continuation of time. So in quantum, we cannot measure time. We can also in real life, we cannot measure time, we can only count it, right? In a quantum reality, the concept of time and memory change drastically, and we cannot hold, I'm not sure even how to address the question of repertoire or a corpus or an archive in that sense, because basically, once you capture an image, once you measure it, right, it collapses. And then it becomes an image. But once we want to catch the actual phenomenal things, we have to account for their nature, their own setting, which is completely always in flux and in dynamics, always in a superposition, if that's helpful.
That's pretty clear, actually. So yeah, it makes completely sense. We discussed about authorship, we discussed about nonlinearity, and so when nonlinearity is there, memory, it's pretty much impossible to attain. So thank you, Noam. Opening up to a few of the questions that our participants raised up over your presentations, I would like to pick the one that Michael Katz did about the Cohen's machines that Christiane was presenting. And in particularly, he was asking, how inventive are the results of Cohen's machines? And I might say that, Michael, if you're here, please, you can expand on this, but like he's referring to Aaron's deterministic rule-based approach, right? Compare, I guess, to today deep learning, Christian, but please let us.
Yeah, I think, Michael, we've had this discussion before. So I think what Cohen did was actually mind-blowing compared to what today's systems do. I want to highlight once again that I'm way more impressed by that than the purely statistical approach. I want to make sure that it's understood that this is not deterministic rule-based programming. It is actual AI and an expert system which relies on feedback and on memory. So it's very different from just simple procedural generative type of work. Sure, he only had specific sets of what the AI could do at the stage of KCAT, for example. It's also highly interesting to see what the rule set is in the output, and what the Aaron system considers a finished composition. That's a question I very often got, from the audience. How does it know when the drawing is finished? So there is a lot of probability encoded in that. And I think doing that from scratch and trying to understand how paintings work and how the act of drawing a line works and creating a composition works, none of that is anything that is considered by most of the current AI models. It's a purely probabilistic statistical approach to doing that, that just in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's pretty much clear now. It is way clearer now. I'm just wondering whether we can circle back slightly, because we received another question related to the repertoire, and referring to Barbara and Maria Luigia Gioffre. She's asking how repertoire, as traditionally intended in dance studies, entangles the concept of the flux, ever-changing and non-autorial dance. So expanding a little bit more on that, because you discussed properly about that, Barbara.
I mean, I think like the repertoire acts for me more as a method, so to say, to understand how can we include these other non-human agents together with traditional authorship and traditional causality. Like all of a sudden, the repertoire as a form of more understanding as a form of curation, as a form of like how do you put these things that would try to give sense or meaning making, or like a curator as a context provider. To me, makes more sense to talk about a repertoire as in like we can expand and not talk just about the sole author, and we could include like much more of this participation that occurs online and is constantly giving like a much more lived experience to the project. If it exists alone, they can never function, and this is sometimes that happens with many digital projects or online programs that like they disappear because no one is really interacting with them. They still in a vacuum. Then therefore a repertoire, if we understand it, is like this could be like a way of like constantly making them be alive. And especially I think the one thing that I'm more interested about in the repertoire is also the idea of like creating some sort of form of belonging. This like there's also a part of like digital artists that have a community. And the case not only like if we think of like the project of Holly, for example, Holly and Matt, they have a group of people, let's say, that like also works with them, and like the spawning is like the project that they have behind it counts with many people creating this kind of like squad form of makers that also support the project. And I think that's this collective form of authorship, which also like if we think of like just only the data sets that are gigantic, and like one cannot like the sole authorship is diluted in a way of like as Noam explained, with like hundreds of millions and thousands of like images, and the parameters that are kept do not refer to that traditional authenticity. Then with a repertoire system and TikTok is like kind of like the kind of same method, no, actually in the same way. It only provides like a platform for this to occur. If we see curating as a form of repertoire and offering that platform for the artworks to flourish and to continue their legacies of like evolutions in the like fostering that kind of live experience for others, I think that's when the idea of the repertoire makes sense. Understanding it as a very traditional way for dance is also not what I was trying to, like what I was intending.
Yeah, you were not. Yeah, exactly. Larissa Kat has her hand raised, and she was actually the first when Noam was still presenting to raise a concern. I'm just wondering whether, Larissa, you want us to read your first question, or you came out with others?
Thank you, Julia, and thanks everyone. Actually, this is another one, so because I thought you didn't see the first one, but I don't know.
No, we are there. We are on spot. So let me know which one you prefer to ask.
Because something else came up as I was listening. So if I may,
of course.
Thank you, Julia. This is for Dr. Segal, because you described AI's influence as creating a post-indexical reality. But how does that concept redefine the relationship between art, technology, and time? Because we were just talking about time. And what implications does this have for the future of art criticism and interpretation? And the second part of this is about the ethical implications. So, questions around authorship, ownership, and preservation of cultural heritage in the digital environment. What are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Well, this is 5 questions in one. I'll try to unpack this and also be a little bit mindful of time. I'll start from the first question. I think what it creates to a certain degree is a rupture. I think we're in a place of rupture with our histories as we are, and here I'm speaking more about like the general society, right? Not necessarily, again, society of artists. For example, the work of Stephanie Dinkins that Christiane mentioned is a work that is very, very accountful for the histories. When those generated started and you asked them to draw a slave ship, of course you could not. I don't know how it is today. I'm not sure there is a big change in that. So there are parts of our history that are completely misguided and contorted right now within the data set, from a complete erasure to misrepresentation. But also there is a question of what we leave for the next generations. Once we again go back to the original labeling of ImageNet, and as it seems right now, there is no large-scale operation to really change those foundations. We're basically building on that contorted labeling. So I guess what I want to, I think it creates like a certain rupture in context in the way that we see histories and we think histories, even in a way that, and we can think about what are the traits that characterize an archive, that this data set is almost like an anti-archive. I would even, not sure that I would go as far as to call it a repertoire, because there is data that is being erased, and it's not in plasticity, it's not changing, it's just being removed from access to larger audiences. So that's about that. And in terms of, you ask about agency, well, of course, I feel that we are going towards an era that we're going to have shared agency. And we're going to see more and more human-machine collaboration in ways that differ from the past histories. Also thinking about like Carol Cohen machines, but very, very different ones as well. And also changing from what we have right now. I saw that someone mentioned in the chat this scanning of the iris, right? And we have now AIs that are completely driven by our alpha brainwaves. Once we're going to full on go into this future, we're going to see different types of emergence that we don't even have the language to speak about with. We can create some hypothesis and that, but it's not really grounded in anything. And I think the most challenging question that we haven't touched upon today is conservation. Conservation of these artworks is very, very, very different than what we have known before because of their nature. I think there is a lot of work to do in terms of developing the language around that. I think it will also support conservation efforts, but I would like to see a future where we as a community of curators and artists really work to shape up that new language. What is agency in that age? Of course, there is agency, but it's a very different type of agency. The question of autonomy, the question of collaboration, and all of those questions are going to change drastically. And it would be fascinating to come up with new concepts and see what are the words that we're going to use to enhance these. So being mindful of time, and also I see that my colleague here wants to say something, so I'm going to...
yeah, thank you, Noam. Actually,
yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. No.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that you had your hand raised, and there might be also a question for you. So once you have your intervention done, we will move forward with a question addressing your own.
Yeah, I had some of the same questions as Larissa that I actually wanted to get to, and I want to provide a little bit more historical context so we do not create confusion here through the conversation. We have very little time. I think the whole session could have focused just on Noam's article, and we still wouldn't have gotten to the bottom of it. But I think we need to pay attention to specifics. The idea of temporality and causality being thrown into question is not at all specific to AI. This is what digital art has always done from the start. So we have to look at how different forms of digital art through time have done that. These issues were discussed in the 1960s when hypertext came about. In the 1990s, also the discussion around performativity was a really, really big one. It's essential to digital art in general. You know, AI aside, it plays out in very specific ways in AI art as opposed to previous art forms. So when we talk about all of that, we really need to be specific also to historical periods. The whole notion of post-indexicality exploded around 2000 with digital photography. This led to the coining of the term post-photography. The University of, I believe it was Aarhus, did a whole study on post-contemporaneity, you know. So we're looking at this through the lens of AI today, but there's a long, long history. I've been very involved in conservation from the 90s. I also, if people want to go back to that, just did a talk at IFA, the Institute of Fine Arts, on that topic. So I would say I find the notion of repertoire very helpful, but I also want to highlight that since the 90s, conservators have actually incorporated these approaches to digital art. I think conservation is way ahead of curation in many, many ways in thinking about the notions of a living archive. Many books have been written about that subject, you know, and how conservation needs to be informed by that. What AI does is really raise more practical issues because we do not have control over the corporate models, you know, and incorporating them into conservation rather than just conserving Alora, which is what we're currently doing, is a whole different set of questions. So my point just being a lot of these aspects have been discussed over 30 years from very different angles. And I think we also need to acknowledge what has happened before. You know, we're not inventing the wheel today. A lot of this already exists.
Was already in place. And speaking about photography, I would like to just address to you the question that Ken Rinaldo left on the chat. And then due to the timing, I think that we should wrap it up after your reply, Christian. So Ken is asking, given that LLMs are often based on human form and photographic works as LLM data sets acquire them, how is this related to the market? And examples, Holly Herdon that you mentioned, Harold Cohen, going on sale along with other AI works soon at Christie's. Does this create a market-driven relation to collections of museums and wealth that are shadows of these data sets? And how can museums and curators move beyond works that tend toward mostly anthropocentric form and concern and move questions and concerns to the more than human other? How is money, Christie's as an example, driving what museums collect and consider important to the history of AI-based art? So there are numerous questions all at once again.
Yeah, so the idealistic answer, but I still believe that this is at the core of museums too, is not at all. We do not pay attention to what sells well at Christie's is absolutely no indicator of any quality to us in any way. Museums are, of course, tied to the market. What we can acquire or cannot acquire is often also determined by price. We need to find people who buy certain things to us that are more expensive, but we tried to create a good buffer to the market. I give you two very practical examples. I'm approached by galleries or by artists every day who want to place their work in the museum and museum's collection for obviously market-related issues. And the Whitney has a rule, as many other museums I'm sure have too, that we do not accept donations by artists who are not already represented in the collection. So unless we have a commitment made to the artist, we by default say no to that. I'm also not allowed to be on panels, moderate panels that are connected to galleries and gallery sales. So there definitely is a buffer. To your other question, which is a very interesting one, I think we see trends throughout time. I mean, there have been times where, like, the representational figurative drawing ruled what was out there, what was in shows, and also what was collected. And then we have phases of abstraction. And it's absolutely true. I think that image sets also determine how artists engage with them, whether they play with them in obvious ways or whether they critique them, they're still bound to that set. So I think these are definitely phases that we're working through and responding to at any given time. But I would say that was also true for painting, for example, or other art forms.
Thank you, Christian. Alfredo?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted actually to, I think we thank everyone, really. Thank you, Julia and Noam and Christian and Barbara for this fantastic discussion. We have to wrap it here. It's 5 o'clock. We are spot on time. I think we don't want to kind of steal more time from our colleague. Just to mention actually that since we are organizing the next IKT Congress in April in the Gulf region for 4 cities for a week, Doha, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Sharjah. We finish with the biennial. And actually one of the shows that we are going to visit is the show that is on now at the Media Majlis Museum, which is on AI and investigative journalism. So those who actually didn't have the chance to ask some question or continue the conversation, we might have actually the opportunity to do it in person, because we also organize some sort of a public program in relation to the Congress, obviously. And that's it. I think I just wanted to thank everyone. Thank you for giving us your time and your view and your expertise and your knowledge. Thanks, Julia, for organizing this one. Thanks, Carolina, actually, for the precious sort of a drive machine that you are behind all of this. And yes, actually, if someone actually who is not a member wants to actually find out more about the IKT, go into iktsite.org. We have all the kind of application guidelines. It's very smooth and easy and totally online. And also the registration of the next Congress, it's up to the 14th of March, if I'm not remember badly. And we do have grants, travel grants available for curators and candidate curators as well. And then those actually travel grants, I think the deadline is the 28th of February, so at the end of this month. Do have a look, and thanks again, and see you soon to the next webinar. Thanks a lot, if not in person.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Have a good evening, day, morning, whatever you are.